back to Action Hour with the Whidbey Environmental Action Network. On today's episode, Marianne, Steve, and I are going to discuss the topic of critical areas, what they are, why they matter, and how to identify them. So I want to start off, if it's okay with both of you, with just reading the definition of critical areas from the Growth Management Act for people who haven't read the document, and then just get into some questions. But the Growth Management Act definition of critical areas. Quote, critical areas include the following areas and ecosystems: wetlands, areas with a critical recharging effect on aquifers used for potable water, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, frequently flooded areas, and geologically hazardous areas. And then it goes on to define that, quote, fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas does not include such artificial features or constructions as irrigation delivery systems, irrigation infrastructure, irrigation canals, or drainage ditches that lie within the boundaries of and are maintained by a port district or an irrigation district or company, which is just kind of like in the weeds with everything else. I'm not sure why it's there, but
it's a gift to a company near Richland,
really?
Washington. Yes. It's
Wow.
very specifically one company near Richland, Washington.
Okay. Well, a gift to them and kind of confusing for us. But okay. So as we've just, heard, the GMA gives us a lot of areas and ecosystems as definition, but what exactly is a critical area?
Well, critical areas were one of the late additions to GMA when it was originally written in the early 1990s. And GMA was written, of course, because the legislature was very scared of an initiative that was going to be run. Mm-hmm. So it's about as well thought out as you can imagine then. Legislature, of course, didn't really want to be put on the spot. So you notice many of these are kind of general terms like critical recharging effect on aquifers used for potable water or fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. So they pretty much left it ultimately to the Growth Management Hearings Board when that finally got going, and courts to define these terms. And that's pretty much what has happened over the years. With the one addition there in 1996, the addition to critical areas needing to be based on best available science, which was a term lifted from the Endangered Species Act, Federal Endangered Species Act. Okay. So I'll just go through these one at a time.
Yeah.
And wetlands were, and you have to go back a while here in the late 1980s, wetlands were a very hot topic all over the country. Actually, they had been for quite a while because basically, over typical losses in a lot of ecosystems of wetlands range from 50% on up to like in the 90% range. For instance, estuarine systems, coastal lagoons and estuaries are in that, over 90% eliminated on the west coast of the United States. Wetlands have been almost eliminated in a whole lot of places. So the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA produced what they called a wetlands manual, which defined wetlands as being based on, and I should say here, you can think of wetlands if you're an ecologist in terms of an ecological wetland, an ecological area, but that's different from a regulatory area.
Ecological wetlands are different than regulatory wetlands, which I'm curious about what that means, what that distinction is.
A wetland is a part of the landscape that is wetter than the rest of the landscape, if you will, typically, and affects the area around it There's usually an area around the wetland that will affect the wetland heavily and in turn is affected by the wetland. Regulatory wetlands are defined, in a way that can be used in law, okay, which means you've got some fairly strict criteria. So jurisdictional wetlands, wetlands that are regulated, typically by either the federal government, back when, we had a Supreme Court that had a half a brain, or a state or a local jurisdiction, are usually defined as being those areas where man, can you reel it off, Marianne? We used to memorize this thing. Okay, they have there's three parameters that have to be met for an area to be considered a jurisdictional wetland. First, it has to have wetland plants. Okay. And that's usually measured in terms of the plant community as a whole and not an entire, not a single plant, though a single plant may be determinative in that community.
Okay.
And ecologists rank plants based on how frequently, what is the probability that they'll be found in a wetland. And so you have 5 categories, basically: always upland, almost always upland, usually upland, kind of neutral, might be in a wetland, might be in an upland, generally going towards a wetland, and then almost always in a wetland. And
Well, you just up to the midway and back again.
did I? I thought I started with uplands. I thought I started with
No, you
uplands.
started at
What is an upland?
Okay,
It's a dry place.
dry place.
Okay.
Dry
Okay.
place.
All right.
So, a plant that is always found in uplands, we would call an obligate plant.
Okay.
It's obligated to be in uplands. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got plants that are obligate wetland plants. They're 99% of the time or more, you're going to find them in wetlands. If you see a skunk cabbage,
I was going to ask, because I always see the skunk cabbage and I'm like, this is a wetland. I even know that.
you're right. Yeah. If you see a skunk cabbage, if you see sluice sedge, and if you see some of the others, then
Nupta is not obligate.
yes, it is.
What's it doing in our driveway?
Because, an interesting point here. I'll get to that. It is a wetland. Now, we process and sell native plant seed, and we actually have Carex of Nupta, a wetland obligate, growing in our driveway. Our driveway is very dry. I can assure you that, except, of course, when it rains. But there's been so much seed around there because that's one of the areas we clean seed at, that it is growing there. Is that a wetland? Well, again, you've got to look at the other 2 parameters. You've got to have a wetland plant community, but you also have to have wetland soil and wetland hydrology. Wetland soils are those soils that are saturated for long enough so they've undergone certain chemical changes that, cause them to change. They are hydric soils. And there's even a book called Hydric Soils of the United States. And there are other
hydric soil. What's hydric soil?
Hydric, wet.
Wet soil. Okay. Hydric.
soil.
Oh, like hydric. Okay, got it.
Hydric.
Yeah. Wet soil. Got it.
So if you, if you go to that place where you have found the skunk cabbage and you put your hand in there and picked up that soil, it'll be very wet. But more to the point, it's going to be this black, typically mucky stuff. And there are various signs in the soil that you can use to determine that it's a hydric soil, even when it's not wet. So, a lot of times, people will drain a wetland or they'll put fill on top of it and they'll think, I got rid of it. Nobody will ever know. But the reality is you can go back to that soil and you can tell that it's a hydric soil.
So you mentioned draining a wetland, which obviously we don't want to be doing. Part of the
It's illegal, except in most of the country now under federal law.
Wait, you said it's illegal except for most of the country now?
Yes. Well, previously, wetlands were being protected under the Federal Clean Water Act.
Mm.
That was up until fairly recently when our brilliant Supreme Court justices, who are, after all, are experts in things like gynecology and human reproduction. Well, they're also world famous experts in ecology and soils and all that kind of stuff. So they decided that unless there is a direct connection between, for example, a wetland or a stream and a river, then navigable water, then it's not regulated under federal law. Now, of course, you can easily see and prove that wetland, even though it's a quarter mile away or a half mile away or even further away, is certainly connected with those in all kinds of ways, through the water going under the surface, through the plants and animals that are peculiar to that wetland or use that wetland that also go over to the navigable waterway. There's all kinds of ways here, but that, I'm afraid, that was, Wetland Science 202, and they dropped out after halfway through Wetland Science 101.
Right.
Okay, then we have wetland hydrology. Okay. And basically, for the plants to be a hydric plant community with hydrophytes, they have to have the soil saturated for 2 weeks or more during the growing season. That's all it takes. 2 weeks or more. The water's there, the soil's kind of anoxic. You have plants that are adapted to growing in those conditions.
Okay.
And there are the typical way you determine that it's got wetland hydrology is you dig a hole. You dig a small hole, a few inches diameter, 6 inches diameter, about 16 inches deep, and you see, is there water there? Does water fill it up really fast? Does water weep in from the sides? What about if it's during the dry season? Well, you look for other signs as well, because the water will rest at different levels at different times of the year. It will leave rust deposits. You literally can see rust in it. And you can also see what are called concretions, these nodules they are almost like rocks, but what they are is they're basically nuggets of rust in the soil in a wetland.
Oh, interesting.
And of course, sometimes, you'll dig down and the soil's just a thick clay or something, and you can't get into it. And of course, water's perching on top of it because you have that impervious layer. And then the soil on top of that is going to start showing some of these other signs. Other ways you can infer wetland hydrology is from seeing leaves on the ground, on the surface that look water stained. You might see these sometimes in those drier wetlands, where they're kind of black. These are black. You can see stains on the trunks of trees and bushes and shrubs where the water has been up to for a while. So there's these various other signs: drift lines, algal mats of algae. So there's other ways you can see it besides just, I stepped in it, my foot went down 3 feet, water was pouring into my boot. I can't get out, call search and rescue. What happens actually a lot every year around here during tourist season, when people go to the shore and they go to some of our estuaries, and when the tide is out, the way that it smells then sometimes when the tide's out there, it smells really bad. It's a knock. That's because the soil doesn't have oxygen in it, because it's covered with water. Okay, and people will go out in that sometimes, and they'll sink, and they'll sink, and they'll sink, and they'll sink. And the tide's going to come back in, and so search and rescue's got to go pull them out. This happens not too uncommonly, actually.
I watched someone run out on the lake, like the beach at Langley downtown, just like trying to beat the sand. just like running as fast as they could in a circle and then coming back, trying not to sink.
I guess.
People. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to go out there because you'll probably.
Unless you're a wetland scientist of some kind, going out into that anoxic muck is probably not real enticing.
No, definitely not. But okay, so that's a wetland.
So you have to have hydrophytic vegetation, you have to have hydric soils, and you have to have wetland hydrology.
Yeah. Well, who is doing this identification?
Consultants like me.
Okay. So, and that's like, and you would go out to do this. You have to basically be asked to do it by somebody in particular who has property where they're trying to determine it. Okay.
Yes. Now there is what's called the National Wetland Inventory, which is a nationwide mapping of wetlands. It is very inaccurate around here because it almost misses all the forested wetlands. Okay, there's a lot of work going on to try to be able to detect forested wetlands from remote sensing, use of satellites. And some of the new things that are coming online, like hyperspectral imaging, which you don't get me talking about because I go on and on about it. It's looking more and more like that's going to be possible, which is good because the current situation is, let's say somebody wants to buy land and build a house. Okay. They can go to the county and they can look at the county's wetland maps, which don't even necessarily have the data entered from people, who've gone out in the field and delineated them, because the county's always behind on that. And they can, what was I going to say? They can go out, look at those county maps, and they'll show some wetlands, but certainly not all. So they've then got a choice, which few people do. But if they think there might be a wetland, hire a consultant or somebody who can tell them. Possibly they could get a county staff out there. Island County used to have a wetland person who would go out and look and see if it's a wetland. At least, you need to get this delineated. You need to have somebody mark the boundaries. And then county did it for a while for a fee. And I don't think Island County is doing that anymore at all. I don't know about other counties in Washington. Now, here's a peculiar thing about the way this works in Washington. Okay, so the wetlands determination, deciding whether it is or is not a wetland, is based on an official manual from the Army Corps of Engineers that, of course, EPA and other agencies and lots of scientists have had input on. Okay. In Washington, however, protection of wetlands is left up to the individual counties. They have to protect them under GMA because wetlands are a critical area. Okay.
Yes.
But every county can kind of do it differently. Now, most counties have just defaulted to the State Department of Ecology's rating system for determining how valuable the wetland might be, which in turn determines the buffer. How valuable the wetland is, how sensitive it is to outside disturbance. Island County back in the early aughts, around 2006, decided that if they adopted their own system, they were somehow going to be able to have something that was laxer than, what other counties were doing, to escape. Because we had county commissioners at that time who were amazingly hostile. In retrospect, years later now, as I look back, every time I look back, I think they were even more hostile to conservation and environmental protection than I thought at the time. And, and if you go through county ordinances, you can find little bombshells here and there from that period, but I won't get into that.
But this was in 2006 that Island County decided to adopt its own policy.
Its own kind of wetland system.
In response to the ongoing case.
Now we still, in response to an ongoing case. Now we still use, the standard method that's used nationally
Okay.
for determining if something is a wetland. Now, the state has a way of rating wetlands based on various things, but Iowa County did something different. And so if you go to apply for a permit and they want you to, say if they're determine if there's a wetland there or if there is a wetland there, how sensitive and valuable it is, and then what the buffer is going to be on it, you'll have something they call these worksheets, land use intensity worksheet and a habitat worksheet. And the combination of those tells you the buffer. Now, I can tell you from experience, the result you're going to get there is really not very different at all from the result you would get just using the state system. But because Iowa County has its own peculiar system, this means that a landowner actually ends up spending more because they've got to find a consultant familiar with the county system, or if they bring somebody in who's not, they have to look it over and get familiar with it. So the earlier county commissioners' efforts to, skate on wetland protection and do a solid for landowners, because of course we all know all landowners hate wetlands, right? Like the county commissioners did back then. In reality, what they've ended up doing is actually costing landowners more.
So do landowners have to do this assessment when they purchase land, or?
When they submit a development permit.
Whenever anybody submits a development permit in the county now, I don't know if that includes things like a driveway permit or something like that, or changing your driveway, might not. But whenever anybody goes for a county permit now, pretty much they have to do those worksheets that say whether or not there's a wetland there. If you want to subdivide land, you have to do that.
Okay.
That was why I did this. Somebody had 10 acres. They wanted to split it into two parts, 3 and 7 acres, so that, they split it that way so that they're far away from the wetland, outside the buffer, no problem, no need to ever impact that wetland from anything they're doing on the property. So that's an option in Iowa County Code that I think is very good that not enough people know about or do, which is if you're going to subdivide your land. I mean, let's say you have 10 acres in the rural zone. The density is 1 unit per 5 acres, 1 house per 5 acres. So obviously, the common thing to do is just split it down the middle, If that means a wetland kind of goes over 2 property lines, kind of goes here. Now we need to have a road through the wetland to get access to one of the parcels. That finally the county has stopped allowing subdivisions that result in having to do that. But for a long time they allowed that. You couldn't do it, so you had to build in the wetland, but so that you could impact the buffer was allowed. County has finally put the kibosh on that.
Not sure of that.
And Marianne's saying she's not sure about that. So it's, something we need to keep an eye on. But the reality is here that, about somewhere probably between 10 and 20% of the landscape is in wetlands.
10 to 20%?
That's probably a fair estimate.
Okay. And
in some areas it's more, in some areas it's less.
On the island, or do you mean what?
On the island. But that's probably a pretty good figure for Western Washington generally.
Okay. And why? So critical areas need to be protected under the Growth Management Act. And as you said earlier, they were kind of like the definition of that was left up to the courts and kind of counties.
Instead of, for instance, Oregon has their type of Growth Management Act, which in part goes to Washington and various other states like Florida to adopt Growth Management Acts. In Oregon, it's a state system. There is a state review board that reviews and has to approve every land use plan from a county. In Washington, we don't have that system. The legislature, in its infinite wisdom, wanted to make sure they weren't on the hook and the state wasn't on the hook for this. So they left it up to every county to adopt its own regulations.
Right.
Now, over time, of course, those regulations between the different counties are getting more and more similar because, of course, they've been appealed. Growth Management Hearings Board or a court says this law means, ABC. And some of the counties then, have to do ABC. So they're getting closer and closer together. And life would be actually much simpler and probably cheaper for everybody involved if some of this stuff was done at the state level instead of the county level.
Right. But a critical area needing to be protected, like what, so we're talking about wetlands right now, which is one of the.
And what does protection mean?
Right. But that's what I mean. What does protection mean? And also why? Why these particular areas? Like you've explained to me how to identify a wetland.
Okay. Well, a wetland, for example.
What does it do?
Besides the fact that it has, great great ecological value, most species of terrestrial vertebrates use wetlands at some stage in their life cycles. I could go on and on, that kind of thing. But also, that's where water gets stored. If there's a heavy rain, if it snows and then it all melts off real suddenly, that's your flood storage capacity. That helps prevent flooding. That helps mitigate flooding. The water stays there year round, but it also, some of that water is inevitably going into the water table down below. So it's recharging the aquifer. So again, it has these different functions. And when GMA was adopted and counties and cities were directed to adopt regulations that protect, critical areas, it was a good question. What does protect mean? Fairly early on, in an early Growth Management Hearings Board case, the Hearings Board ruled that protection meant no net loss of functions.
Right. Okay.
So, in fact, we had a case with Island County in the late 90s, early aughts, where they said they were only protecting small streams for water quality and not habitat. And the Hearings Board ruled that, no, you've got to protect them for all their functions. The county appealed that, and ultimately we got a ruling from the Court of Appeals, the second highest level of courts in Washington, that protect means you've got to protect all the functions and values.
Right. So zero net loss of all functions of an ecosystem.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to go off into net loss now. I'll never get
Okay. No. Yeah. Net losses. We'll do a whole episode on that because it seems like it's a very important factor. But okay. So have we kind of covered wetlands? Do we want to move on to the next one?
Here, wetlands, though, it's worth noting in the political sense have always been a really hot button issue. And one thing about the protect thing here, let me just go back to that for a minute, is that protect was taken by the Hearings Board to mean no net loss. The Washington Supreme Court phrased it as do no harm. Now, that sounds great, no net loss, but what if you have a situation where you've already lost a lot?
Right.
Somebody's got, a wet pasture that's overgrazed. They've been overgrazing it for years and years and years, and it's right by a stream. And, a buffer on that stream is desperately needed for all kinds of reasons, water quality, habitat, you go on and on about that. But under GMA, you can't compel that landowner to put a buffer on that land. Now, the reality is that by virtue of that insult, that environmental insult continuing, let's take the case of the overgrazed pasture next to the stream. You probably got cow shit or whatever, manure going into the stream, degrading its water quality, in turn impacting all kinds of organisms and things downstream, like salmon.
Yeah.
So it's not just a static thing. It's not, here we have the areas that are degraded, they are degraded. And here we have the areas that are still not degraded, and we're going to protect those. Okay? Because those areas that are degraded are continuing to cause additional degradation elsewhere in the system. In 2006, in the early aughts, the state Supreme Court heard a case brought by the Swinomish tribe, arguing basically what I just said, that in an agricultural setting, that, the reality is it's not as if these are not causing further harm. And the state Supreme Court didn't buy it.
What does that say? It says, okay, if I'm so full of it, take a drink. Oh. Oh, wow.
You'll notice that it's a likeness of Steve.
That's from the period in Ween's history when me personally, by name, and Ween were named over 40 times in a proposed ordinance by the county.
Oh.
Being the reason they had to pass this bullshit ordinance they were proposing, which was ridiculous. And in fact, they sent out a flyer to over 20,000 of them in the county, 20,000 households, every tax parcel attacking us by name.
Wow.
Those were exciting times. We had to have escorts and things,
Really? You had to be escorted? That's so intense.
Really? Yeah, it was pretty intense.
Yes.
It's pretty intense.
The worst it got, somebody tried to run us off the road over on Ewing Road.
Yeah.
That is so terrifying.
Hey, look, you hear about environmental activists in other parts of the world, getting shot and things. Well, it has happened in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, there was that in that environmental law presentation from the UN. They were talking about environmental defenders and how more people are being killed over like right now than there were, I think, the last time they did their report. That it's actually on the rise, but that also that there are more protections in certain countries around that. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, things have definitely cooled, I think, but I just reflexively always keep an eye on the rearview mirror and,
Yeah, that's very intense. But
they don't tell you that in environmental courses in school, I don't think, but
right. You're like studying ecology and you're not really thinking about having to have bodyguards for speaking about science. Right. I mean, but I do think it's interesting because, you mentioned that a lot of the, I don't know, I guess the systems like county systems for critical areas, that they're becoming more similar. And I'm wondering if that has anything to do with them having to use best available science. There were two things that really, actually put some teeth in the whole GMA's whole critical area system. One was, defining what protection meant. So there was something instead of just you have to protect critical areas. Well, look at that. We put a sign by it, Right. But now it's like, no harm, no net loss.
No net loss. And then best available science, which was, I think, added to GMA in 1996. You have to protect using best available science. So now, you can duke it out about the science.
Well, that is a question I have. Like, who determines what is the best available science?
Well, there is a whole rule in Washington law about that. And in some kinds of critical areas, like fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Priority Habitats and Species Program has been defined as the best available science, but it's not the only best available science. So, if you look at the case law, decisions made by the hearings board and by courts, counties and cities have to choose from within the range of the best available science.
Okay.
So, but again, if you have to protect all functions, that kind of reduces the legal room in that. For example, So it's great if the reins of the science is that for a certain kind of creek, you need a 25-foot buffer for minimal water quality protection, but a 100-foot buffer for wildlife. But you can't just do the 25-foot buffer. Yeah. And
In there.
counties and cities can depart from the best available science. There's been rulings to that effect, but basically you got to have a really good reason to do that. Really good reason why. We're in the middle of the city. We've got these other GMA goals, so we're gonna skate on how much buffer it gets or something.
So
let's go on to more critical areas here.
Yeah.
Okay, so wetlands were always the hot button one.
So hottest topic on the town, wetlands. I live in a wetlands. I live on a buffer, I think, of wetlands. So
possible.
Yeah, I think so. Marianne and I were talking about it. I live around a wetland preserve. Like my backyard is a wetland preserve. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So next we have CARAs, critical aquifer recharging areas.
Yes.
Okay. And this kind of illustrates there's sort of two different types of critical areas. In one, we're kind of protecting the critical area from people. Okay. And in the other, we're kind of protecting people from the critical area.
No, we're protecting the critical area for people.
For people, or we're protecting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess geological hazardous areas, you're protecting people from the critical area. But But the recharging, the critical recharging, that's actually for people. Yeah. It's for us to use, right? It's like we're like
exactly. So the way that's mostly been interpreted is in terms of which areas, what aquifers used for potable water are particularly sensitive for various reasons. In Island County, the obvious is seawater coming into the aquifer and polluting it from the coast. Saltwater intrusion into the aquifer.
I thought that the entire county has been declared a CARA.
Well, the entire county, it's a little vague the way Island County has done this, but there are some watersheds where, there's some really strict criteria about it, and there's real concern. A lot of places, they mostly focus on, here's an area where because of the soil, stuff will go right down into the aquifer. We don't want polluting industry on top.
Well,
it's an issue in Island County so much, but it is in other counties.
I need to ask you a question about just general terminology. For our listeners, what is an aquifer?
Okay. If you're on Whidbey Island, in particular, your water is coming from below your feet. Now, it may be below your feet, in the vicinity somewhere else, but it's below your feet.
Right.
We do not have any rivers to speak of. We've got, some year-round streams, not that many of those even. But mostly we rely on that aquifer, the ground with the water in it. And it's generally not like a big reservoir. You got this big open area full of water under the ground, a big cavern full of water. It's more like sand and rock and other kinds of materials where water fills the spaces between. Okay. And then when you drill a well, you're putting a tube in there, water comes into the tube, just like when you dig a hole in a wetland, water fills the hole. Same idea, only under the ground and put it out. Now, a lot of places in the world actually, in situations like Whidbey Islands, like Australia, for example, they rely on rainwater to catch it off their roof. And that would, of course, be a very large change for people in this culture. Because I think you'd see a lot of lawns going away real fast.
If we relied on rainwater, would that, if we shifted to relying on rainwater, would that affect the aquifer? Because we'd be like taking the water before it goes into the ground.
Well, that's actually an issue that has come up because, people were talking about, and some people have done it, building ponds where they catch their roof runoff and then use that for irrigation or, as an emergency backup if there's a fire. And this went around for a while. Technically, the rain, once it hits a surface, is a water of the state. So you do not have a right to just use it. But basically, nobody is going after anybody. And, ecology basically has a policy that we're not going to go after somebody for catching their roof water.
Right. So that nobody's going to be like penalized for utilizing their rainwater. But I guess I was wondering if we did it on a massive scale, would it like impact vegetation and ecosystems? Because
it would. We, the aquifer, if we were able to get enough. Now, Whidbey is not homogeneous in terms of its climate or its rainfall. Right. You go up to central Whidbey, there's places there that only get 17 inches of rain a year, 17 inches of precipitation. That's semi-arid. That's like Washington.
Well, that's why there's a puntia growing there.
That's why, for instance, on Eby's Bluff, you've got cactus, so the puntia fragilis, You want to find the next nearest place where that grows besides the San Juans, you got to go over to Okanagan County. Okay.
That's interesting.
But on the south end here, typical rain, I think Langley's supposed to get like 36 inches a year.
Langley is 30, and 30. we have maxed out at once 51.
Yeah, wow. Back in the 80s, we were tracking that around where we are, pretty far south on the island for 51 year. So, there's a wide range there. If somebody's catching it, if you paid the whole area, you would catch a lot, obviously, and you really could, have the aquifer just kind of, sit there with what's in it, and it's not going to get recharged. Okay,
so what does it mean to recharge an aquifer? Like, what's that process?
Rain comes down, it falls on the surface, it percolates into the soil. Okay. And it, gravity is gravity. It keeps working its way down. It will, until it's either in another place that's saturated, or if it's dispersed enough, then it'll adhere to molecules of sand and stuff. But that's kind of a whole different thing.
Yeah.
So presumably, we all assume that the amount of water, we pump out of our well and we use to drink and eat and bathe with and water the garden and, spray the dog down when they get something smelly and all that kind of stuff, that enough rainwater is falling so that it replenishes the aquifer with at least that amount.
Right. So it's about replacing the water that we are utilizing. And potable water, is it potable or potable?
Potable.
So
potable. I use both.
Yeah, okay. But potable water, that is water that we, like you just said, use to drink and shower and wash our dogs and all the things that we as humans use water for in our daily lives, basically.
And, on the island here, you've got water systems, and some of those get to be pretty good size for the raids, for example, the lemurs. Those clusters mostly along the shoreline.
Or Freeland.
Or Clinton, for that matter, where there's a water system and they have some big wells, or Langley has some big wells, and they're serving a whole area. And then you got smaller systems like that. And then, of course, you've got enormous numbers of people who just have their own well.
Right. And there's like, is there like A system and B system wells and then individual wells? Is that?
That's it. Yeah. And I don't remember. Those are Department of Health, State Department of Health designations.
B systems are
4 units.
2 to 10.
A systems are the honkos.
Are more than 10.
Oh, more than 10. Okay. Yeah. I know that, there were questions around that because, well, okay. Back it up. I know that I was speaking with Marianne the other day about wells and how when it comes to critical recharging areas and wells in Island County, people have to get permission to drill a well, but there is no permitting process around it. And we don't know how many are actually in the ground right now. Is that true?
You don't have to get permission to drill a well.
You
But
don't?
after you've drilled it, you have to register it with the Department of Health.
Okay. So then there is there is like a number. We have a number of how many wells are on the island.
Yes, and they are mapped, in fact, by the county hydrogeologist. The former hydrogeologist, Doug Kelly, did this. He took all that data from the Department of Health and wherever else he could get it, and he mapped the wells, GPS.
Oh, so we know how many wells are on the island, but you don't have to get permission to drill it.
No.
Don't really know. It's an attempt, and who knows whether we're 75% or 95% accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there are people who have done it and haven't registered it.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay.
I can assure you of that.
Right. And then is there any system of monitoring the wells, or not monitoring, but like, I guess, what is it?
Monitoring
Inspecting the wells that are registered.
No, but I understand under the current regulations, if you drill a new well, you've got to put a meter on it.
Okay.
Now, whether anybody's collecting data off that meter to see how much is being pumped out, I don't know.
So it's not being metered the way like electricity is metered.
No.
Which
But
means
that's an interesting point. It could be.
The larger systems.
The larger systems are. Yeah, the larger systems are.
right, the ones that are like for communities. Like my parents live in a community that has a larger well system, which I think is an A system, and those are regulated in some way that the others aren't.
B&W well drilling and the Lehman brothers and their dad, they have run water systems. I happen to know the Austin system, which is in the generally in the Mutiny Bay area.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, for some reason, I know that it has 475, or did have back then, households on that one system.
Wow.
So there are some real big systems there.
Yeah, that's a really large system.
Yeah. I don't know how many Langley has, but it serves all the residents of Langley, and Langley theoretically has 1,100 residents at this point, plus everybody in Sandy Point.
Okay, and so they are all on the same system, but even the water systems downtown in a place like Langley are still well systems. It's just a huge well.
And we're going to go out and have a look on Wednesday. I'm not sure if there's more than one. I think there are several, and they're on higher ground in Langley, but one of the city council is going round and very nervous about how many more households can we hook up to this system before this well starts sucking salt.
Right, which comes back to the one of the reasons why a critical recharge area is a critical area is because if it doesn't replenish itself, if the aquifer isn't given the chance to replenish itself because it's being overdrawn, then in our case, because we're on an island, seawater fills the void. And then,
yes.
Yeah. What happens when that happens?
Okay, so several things. There's this thing called a cone of depression, which basically, if you suck on a straw with a glass of water, it's too small to see because it's just a glass of water, but it's sucking the water in. That creates a vacuum around the edges. Mm-hmm. And the larger the straw, so the more water that you're pulling out of a particular well, the larger that cone of depression, the greater the vacuum you're creating. Mm-hmm. And it's been a big fight with the Department of Ecology and the Department of Health, whether it is better to have 10 small straws or one great big one.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The department keeps insisting one great big one is better because it's only one puncturing of the soils and only one potential contaminant, around that one drilled hole. But I don't believe that they're considering islands because saltwater is known to intrude 5 miles and more. 5 miles is usually considered the limit along a shore. There is no place in Island County more than 3 miles from salt water.
Right.
One draw one's conclusions.
Right.
Saltwater intrusion has been a problem in a number of areas. We saw it on Keystone Spit, and for some reason I remember it as being 1995. All the vegetation on Keystone Spit died. And we were trying to figure out what is going on here. And what is going on is that it is a sand spit, and there is a lens of fresh water under that spit. But under that lens of fresh water, there is there is salt water that moves in toward Crockett Lake, which is a brackish lake. And it was a particularly droughty year, and that narrow lens of fresh water dried up. And most of the plants there could not tolerate salt water, and they couldn't get fresh water, and they died.
Right. Right. And that's so with saltwater intrusion, landscapes, plants, animals that rely on fresh water die when that happens.
Yep.
And in our case, if there's saltwater intrusion and that saltwater intrusion is happening in an area where there is a well for potable water, you wouldn't be able, your potable water would be contaminated with salt water.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that happened in the 90s at Muirkirk Gardens. Their rhododendrons started to die. And they tested their water, and their water was basically seawater.
Right.
And they capped off their well, and they did an alternative system.
That's how they managed it. When did this happen at Muirkirk Gardens?
In the 90s.
In the 90s. Okay. So they like capped their well, and then
I think they went to catchment ponds of some sort. I'm not real clear.
Okay.
But it has been a problem all around the edges. I mean, the shoreline is the obvious place where that's going to be a problem.
Right.
But again, there's no place more than 3 miles from salt water.
Right. So it could be a problem for the entirety of the island if we are not careful about making sure that we are allowing the aquifer to recharge. Like,
exactly.
The stakes are very high if we overdraw.
We in serious trouble. And way back then, it was a regional drought that happened here back then, and we had reason to be out in the San Juan Islands, and it was a little bit shocking to see those tanker trucks full of water going on the ferry out to the San Juans. That was weird.
Well, so this is something that is that I'm curious about because, the island is a sole source aquifer, which means that we don't have rivers or any other kind of water system with the exception of the aquifer in the ground for us to get water. But Oak Harbor doesn't get its water from the aquifer, right? The city of Oak Harbor is getting its water elsewhere.
Okay, so it's not the whole city, and I can't remember if it's 2/3 or 3/4 or something like that of the city and part of the Navy base as well. They get their water from the Skagit River, which is allocated by about 600% the last time I checked.
Right, and that means that the water rights, they've oversold the water rights on the river.
That's right. Okay. That's right. So
they're buying
Yeah. So the last kind of the last line there is the city of Anacortes, and then a line comes down from Anacortes to Oak Harbor. And in the past, Anacortes has found it necessary to double the price of the water, and Oak Harbor screamed. And Anacortes said, yeah, well, I mean, you can always turn it off. And that's not really an option, is it?
Right. And so like our most densely populated area on the island is not drawing from the aquifer. Even if it's not the whole city of Oak Harbor, there's a significant portion of the population that's getting its water from elsewhere.
Yes. Which, given the fact that our North End aquifers are contaminated with PFAS, is probably saving grace for Oak Harbor. But
Right. But it being, so here's a question I have, in terms of PFAS contamination and also the streams that are polluted on the island, when it comes to potable water, what is the county's responsibility for protecting these areas based on the definition of critical area?
Good question.
Net loss.
Yeah, no net loss of ecological function.
Does ecological function include us? Like people?
Making sure
I don't know that that's been litigated.
But well, it should, right?
But one of the things that we've been arguing over is how much land can you make impervious to rainwater? There has to be a balance. If you pave the whole place, all the water runs off. You get no aquifer recharge. Your drinking straw comes up empty. We are asserting loudly that we need to minimize impervious surfaces. Among other things, okay, if you have an equal area of pervious and impervious, in the pervious area, the water will presumably perk down into the soil. The impervious surface, that water will gather and become a negative. It will become a problem because it becomes quote storm water.
Right.
And that storm water becomes powerful. It starts causing erosion in some places, and it's picking up all manner of contaminants off that surface. And so that stormwater ends up having to be controlled and channeled and moved out to the salt water. So not only have you lost it, but you've created a negative impact.
Here's a question I have about water. So in this attempt to allow for our aquifers to recharge and to not create further issues like stormwater runoff, I'm just curious, what do you know about and what do you think about us recycling our water that we use?
It's called gray water, and it's a common thing. We've run into this a number of times. Gray water is water which has been used in a house, but is not as contaminated as, quote, black water, which is what you flush down your toilet.
Right.
And there are many ways to recycle gray water or to use gray water, for instance, in watering your garden. And there are gray water capture and retention systems that you can buy or build. And what I don't know, Steve is Mr. Numbers here, is how much impact that has on aquifer recharge. If every house on Whidbey Island and on Camano Island had gray water capture and reuse, what would be the impact on aquifer recharge, on withdrawals from wells? I don't know that number. I don't know if anybody knows.
Right. Right. That like it's not clear what the impact would be and whether or not it would really even make a dent in things. Like,
I don't know. It's, it's sort of like recycling. It makes you feel good.
right. But it may not be like, well, it's so funny because I've been thinking about that a lot, like reduce, reuse, recycle, how as a society, we're pretty good at the recycling part. We're pretty good now at the reusing part, but we're really bad at the reducing part.
I don't think we're very good at the reusing part either, but
well, I think it's more in vogue to reuse things, right? Like in my generation, people love to thrift because they're not, contributing to new clothing being made and things like that, which is once again a feel good thing and maybe not. Well, I mean, maybe it is having an impact or not, but like I think that the real change comes from the reduction.
yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. But okay, so back to these critical areas. Do we have more to say about these recharging areas, or do we want to move on to fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas?
The only thing I'll add to that is that the primary pollution problem Islands County had in terms of its water supply, its aquifer, has been saltwater intrusion. But there are also some
toothless cows.
The primary problem, I said.
Yeah.
The other problem that has occurred in the past is nitrate pollution, animal agriculture, mainly on Central Whidbey in some locations. So that's something too that now the county sort of keeps an eye on.
Okay, animal waste pollution. Yeah,
animal waste. And actually, I believe around Freeland, there's been some indication there may be elevated nitrates in some areas, which probably be due to, lots of septic systems, I would expect.
Okay, I'm going to pause here to say that this is going to be the end of our first episode on critical areas, and we will continue this conversation on the next episode where we'll go through fish and wildlife habitat conservation, frequently flooded areas, and geologically hazardous areas. We're going to become famous for the 2-part episodes because we're coming up on 1 hour, but we've only gone through 1.5 critical areas. Which is okay. I'm into it.
Another man up in the pulpit in the state house. Head of the table with a black pen, scratching egos, talking too loud. Externalize every outcome, every warm gun, every profit. And kneeling down to the flashing numbers, the NASDAQ, the cold constructs. Running backwards to just keep moving, just keep moving, just keep moving. I'm learning every lesson that our mothers tried to teach us.
This podcast is a production of the Whidbey Environmental Action Network and is made possible by our generous donors. Produced, edited, and mixed by me, Amanda Bullis. Special thanks to Marianne and Steve for their years of service through action and for lending their voices to this podcast. To WEEN's Executive Director, Marnie Jackson, and our board for their leadership. Special thanks to Whidbey musician and WEEN board member Nathaniel Talbot for letting us use his track, Intuition, from the album Animal, available on Bandcamp.
Back at the workplace, every day on your paycheck, a volume of confidence against the idea of your body being put into your own hands. So please don't hold it, please don't hold it, please don't hold it back. Unleash the power, the straight logic of compassion. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard facts. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. Just need a woman's intuition, get us on track. this man's allegory, slowly erasing that old violence from the story. Recoupling emotion, slow emotion to intelligence, granting the planters, healers, teachers, feelers a new relevance. What I need now ain't that old religion or the cold hard